so far. My hometown is in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. So it's near Dubai if you've ever been there. Moved to the US at 18, so went to the University of California, Berkeley. Did an undergrad in industrial engineering and operations research, did a minor in electrical engineering and computer science. Loved school, so decided to do my master's in machine learning and data science right after in Evanston at Northwestern, so did that for about 16 months. And then got my first job. So I started out at Deloitte Consulting, so I was in the AI and data practice. I worked with pretty much all the biggest TMT clients, so the Facebooks, the Amazons, NVIDIAs of the world. Decided to do a pivot and move into the M&A practice. So I was still a data scientist, but I was working on M&A strategy and diligence using data science as a tool. And then I had this epiphany that I wanted to now learn business because I love school. Decided to go to not just one of the best, in my opinion, the best business school in the world, so Chicago Booth, and I'm over here right now. So that's my story. I want to kind of very simply define what social network analytics is. So we get so much information, right, every day. Hey, you want to network, you need to talk to people, the value of the MBA is who you know. Social network analytics is really useful because it's the mathematical study of how people connect. And I think it's really interesting because it blends three different fields. It blends sociology, it blends psychology, and it blends statistics and math. I kind of set the scene for the study I did. So our master's program is about 44 students, so super small, way smaller than Booth. It's 15 months full time. And we typically do something called a practicum, which is a 9-month experience where you effectively work with a technology or an analytics company on a real world client problem. So I actually collected data from my entire cohort on who was friends with who asked whom for advice, and we also did a small personality test. You might say that's kind of invasive and there's a potential for a lot of drama to get started, but we anonymized the results. So there's no heartbreaks, right? I thought you were a friend, but you didn't select me on the survey, stuff like that. So it was all anonymized. And then I worked with this lab called the Sonic Lab. It's the Science of Networks and Communities at Northwestern, one of the world's most recognized labs for social network analytics. I was fortunate to take a class with a professor who leads the lab, Professor Noshir Contractor, and then we ended up publishing at this conference called ASONAM, which is, you can see the full form there, but it's the International Conference on Advances in Social Network Analytics and Mining. So I want to leave you with 5 very simple ideas. One of the biggest tensions at Booth, I just talk to a lot of people, right, is should we have a crew, like a really tight set of friends, or should we have should you be more of a floater? So the statistics has an opinion on this. It's called the strength of weak ties. So this was a fascinating piece of research that this professor at MIT called Mark Renovetter published in 1971. And what he found is that throughout your career, so they studied a lot of professionals in our but also related industries, they saw that professionals who had lower network constraint actually got more ideas, were more likely to be promoted, and even had higher compensation. And the idea behind that was this statistical concept called network constraint. So if you look at node A, you see that node A is connected to 3 people, right? And in the second network, it is also connected to 3 people. But the position of node, or in the second network, B is also connected to 3 people. But A enjoys a lower network constraint because it actually connects 3 other groups of people, versus B just sits in its own clique and only talks to people it knows very well. So the big idea is that weak ties are actually what lead to career advancement, innovation, and growth throughout your career, not the 4 or 5 group of people who you're super tight with. So I think that's the big idea I want to share about network constraint and why weak ties actually lead to more growth compared to strong ties. The next is this idea called homophily. Now, you might have, my mom would always tell me this, right, to hang out with the good kids in high school and middle school, but birds of the same feather flock together. So similarity breeds connection. In our study, we polled the entire cohort, right, what's your nationality and who do you hang out with? And then we ran something called a community detection algorithm. So it's an algorithm that is able to sniff out communities in the network. And what you can see here is a very strong demarcation by nationality. So you have a lot of the American students on the bottom right, so the purple cluster. You have a lot of these students from India on the bottom left, so you have the green cluster, and then you have a lot of the Chinese students on the top left, in the red cluster. So somehow we ended up self-dividing ourselves into communities based on nationality, and that was the key driver of community formation, right? I haven't done the study at Booth, but it's an open jury. The jury's still out on how we build our communities. If you leave, and the key idea here is if you leave your networks and your teams unchecked, they will tend to homophily. Not just demographic homophily, but also ideological homophily. So you end up spending time with people who maybe went to the same university as you or grew up in the same part of the country. But studies show again and again that CEOs with highly heterogeneous networks in terms of nationality actually had higher firm valuations. Now that's a correlational study, not a causational study. But one of the ideas behind why that could be the case was enhanced social learning. So you learn a lot more from people who are different than you than from people who are similar to you. And in fact, there's a lot of research that says teams that are consciously balanced for diversity, not just of demographics, but thought, perform way better. So the more you're aware of this homophily instinct that we all possess, the more you're able to consciously counterbalance it. The third key idea I want to leave you with is that shared experiences are better than coffee chats. When I started at Booth, my dad would ask me, what do you do? Like, what are the classes like? I'm like, all I do are coffee chats. I'm an expert coffee chatter. I can chat up anybody, right? He's like, so why are we paying all this money to drink all this coffee? It was still a conversation we had. He's like, how are your grades? For some reason, my parents are very obsessed with grades. They're like, how are the grades? Grades don't matter. We have ND over here. But the idea I want to share with you is, so we had 3 parallel networks floating around in my cohort. We had the friendship network, so who considers who a friend. We had the advice network, which is who asks whom for advice, and then we have the teaming network, which is the practicum teams I mentioned. So these were groups of 5 people that were assigned by the program. The biggest predictor of a tie in the friendship network, so who considered whom a friend, was actually that you already collaborated on the practicum project. That made it more likely that you'd consider somebody a friend. And while catching up with people over coffee or getting dinner together or doing trips is fun, I really want to emphasize that whenever we're in class together, there is value to teaming up with people you've never teamed up with before as a way of connecting with them. So use that lever wisely and mindfully, because it's a great way to build authentic, genuine relationships that don't require going on a very expensive Colombia trip or perhaps dropping $100, $200 at a good restaurant in Chicago. So make sure you use those teams. The fourth idea I want to leave you with is network formation isn't magic. There's math that drives network formation. And 2 things we found, not just in our study, but in network studies in general, is that there's something called reciprocity, right? And that's why you should always make the first move. We're more likely to like people who like us back, right? Most ties ended up becoming reciprocal. There were very few ties that were just one-sided, like, oh, I think you're my friend, but for some reason you don't consider me a friend. So there is a value to just initiating sometimes. Hey, we haven't caught up in a while, like let's grab coffee. Hey, I'm hosting this kickback. I didn't see you for the last, 3 or 5 months. Why don't you come over, right? So there's value to initiating ties because more likely than not, those ties get reciprocated back. The second is triadic closure, which is, so in this case, if you look at the top panel, A and B share a mutual friend, the red node. It's only a matter of time before that triad closes. So A then connects with B. And the idea behind that is there's value to sharing mutual friends, and sometimes in your professional life you might encounter maybe a certain team or a certain practice or a certain engagement that you want to get on at your firm. One of the easiest ways to do that, maybe the engagement manager, I used to work in consulting before, is not that is not that happy for you to join. One way to do that is to maybe work with his peers or her peers, right? So another engagement manager who's worked on a project similar to that, and their friends. So that leads to you guys getting connected quicker. So use strategic closure throughout your career to drive network formation. The fifth idea is this idea called invisible inequity. And the way I want to introduce this concept is that there's a lot of talk around representation, right? Like we need more representation. And representation is important, but it's just a number. What matters more is the way you structure the network. So as an example, our cohort was perfectly balanced. We had 24 guys and 24 girls. But if you look at the network, the positioning of those nodes are very, very different. So a lot of the male students in blue are actually positioned at the center of the network. So they have a lot more connections outgoing and incoming. And a lot of the female students are at the peripheries of the network. And this again ties in with the network constraint idea that where you are positioned in the network affects the information inflow you get and the access to new ideas. And whenever you look at teams, right, whenever we start a career, look at organizations or perhaps teams to join, it's not enough to just ask what does representation look like on this team. It's also important to ask how are people exactly networked in this team, right? Who has high centrality? Who's on the peripheries? Because over a career, things like these often lead, especially in the technology industry, lead to higher attrition amongst minority professionals. That's something to think about as well. Avoid invisible inequity, and when you're in positions of leadership, try to mitigate invisible inequity amongst your team members. So the numbers or representation isn't enough. It's also important to think networks. That being said, I want to wrap it up with 5 simple ideas that I want to leave you with. The first is that weak ties are stronger than strong ties. So of course you have your crew or you have people you get along with, but it's also important to stay connected with somebody you met maybe on the train from Harper or to MPP. It's also important to think about homophily, right? So more likely than not, you'll end up gravitating to people who are like you. And that's not a bad thing, but there's value to thinking heterophily, thinking of people who are different than you. Third, shared experiences are better than coffee chats. And one of the cheapest or most inexpensive shared experience you can do is work with people in different teams than what you're used to. So use team formation as a way to drive network growth. The fourth is networks follow predictable patterns. So use triadic closure, use reciprocity, transitivity to build your network, almost like a garden. The fifth is whenever you look at teams or when you become leaders, think about invisible inequity. How do we get everybody involved in the conversation, not just demographically, but also in terms of the network that they're part of. That being said, thank you again for paying attention and happy to answer any questions.